Hey guys, Dre here with another sort of mini podcast video blog sort of thing. I don't know what to name these anymore. I didn't want to kind of just bring back the old Dre TV username. I felt it was a little bit too cheap. I don't know. Is that something you guys want to see? Let me know. But first of all, I just want to say more than anything else, massive thanks for the fantastic reaction to the last video blog I put out about Ferrari, Sebastian and Charles Leclerc. It went down really, really well. You guys seem to really like the throwback to the old format that I used to do all the time, which was just me having a few bullet points and just shooting from the hip, talking about motorsport. And I thought I'd try something a little bit different. Now, I know there's not a lot of World Superbikes videos on this page, but I feel like this is an interesting topic that, you know, even if you're a fan of motorsport in general, you might have two cents of an opinion on, because it's genuinely interesting. And there's a lot of relation to other series, and that regards dominance. And particularly if you're a bike fan. If you're a fan of MotoGP, for example, I've got a feeling this is going to be very much down your alley. So let me know if you enjoy it, and if you want to see more of this in future, let me know. But for those guys who are unaware, I used to be the co-presenter of a radio show called Bike Live on Downforce Radio and on Motorsport 101, sadly now defunct, but we were following World Superbikes full time. Now, in case you're new to the series, because I know for a fact it's not as popular as MotoGP in general, it's not got as many eyeballs on it, but it's certainly interesting. Now, if you've been watching bikes in general or kept your eye on the news for the last 5 years, you've probably heard this man's name come up before. It's Jonathan Rea. Jonathan Rea, for those unaware, has won 4 consecutive World Superbike Championships for Kawasaki. 2015, 16, 17 and 18, with varying degrees of dominance. He has been the face of a series for almost half a decade now. Ever since switching to Kawasaki, he's been virtually unbeatable over a 30-plus race season, because we all know Worlds now has 2 races per weekend. Well, 3 now, but more on that later. You've probably heard his name come up. He's been talked about getting a MotoGP seat full-time as well, but the right seat's never come up for him to justify moving over. And you may remember the fact he filled in once upon a time. When Casey Stoner got hurt in 2012, Rea stepped in for Repsol Honda and had a couple of wildcard performances and got into the top 8 on both occasions. Very impressive stuff. Now, don't get it twisted here, folks. Jonathan, okay, Worlds, we all know, is not the same quality as MotoGP, and if anything, if you're a MotoGP fan, you've probably been spoiled the last 2 or 3 years, given the fact that, you know, MotoGP has had a much closer field due to standardised ECUs, concessions, and generally Dorna's efforts to try and bunch the field closer together. But World Superbikes in general has got an underrated field of talent, and you know, Jonathan Rea is a great rider in his own right. Tom Sykes, who was his teammate at Kawasaki for years, almost a decade, he was with Kawasaki in general, was a world champion in his own right in the series. Chaz Davies is another guy that is arguably a top 20 rider on the planet, a guy that used to be on the 250 circuit a long time ago and is still a world-class motorcycle rider. Marco Melandri is a former world champion. Sandro Cortese is now a world champion in 2 different formats, whether it be in Moto3 and in World Super Sport. Michael Vandermark's been teased with MotoGP rides full-time for a long time. And hey, other guys you probably are well aware of got their starts on the World Superbike ladder, like Cal Crutchlow, another Supersport champion. Danilo Petrucci and Frankie Morbidelli both made names for themselves on the ladder in Superstock and Superstock 1000. So it's not like, okay, I know it's going to look like a B-tier series compared to MotoGP, but many of the talents you now root for and care about in MotoGP got their start over in World Superbikes in some capacity. Now, all this talk started when Alvaro Bautista was announced to be leaving MotoGP to head over to Ducati's World Superbike factory team to spearhead the team alongside Chaz Davies. Chaz Davies has been a perennial contender in World Superbikes for quite some time, but has never won the big one. There was a lot of excitement over this, but now you've probably heard World Superbikes in the news for different reasons, given that Alvaro Bautista has won all 9 of the series races to start the 2019 season in Phillip Island, in Thailand, in Buriram, and in Aragon, as we saw this past weekend. 9 in a row, the perfect season so far. Jonathan Rea right behind him with 9 second-place finishes. It's been a funny old time over there. So how did we get to this point? Well, first of all, Bautista was kind of half pushed out the door of GP in the first place, to be fair, which is, unfortunate, but sometimes the nature of the sport. He got squeezed out as time had gone on. He's in his mid-30s now. I think MotoGP in general are looking for Marc Marquez 2 rather than looking for another solid veteran. Given Marquez's dominance in GP, they want to find the next someone like Fabio Quartararo, a guy who could maybe beat him one day, who's a bit younger, which is terrifying to say given that Marc Marquez is still only 26. But hey, needless to say, Bautista's gone over there. Now this, I would often argue, is a bit of a perfect storm of developments. Ducati's brand new race bike for this year was a V4 powered version of their standard Panigale. They've had that Panigale for quite some time. The old version, it was a 1300cc brute that was very, very fast in a straight line, but didn't have the ultimate package to win races consistently. The V4 is a different animal entirely. Almost developed purely in mind to win this series. 225 horsepower, 200 mile an hour top speed, winglets on the bike, something directly taken from MotoGP and their MotoGP technology, given how successful Ducati has been in MotoGP in recent years. Multiple race wins with Andrea Dovizioso and Jorge Lorenzo in recent times. The V4 was almost kind of built with that in mind. Like, some of their MotoGP tech stripped straight off the race bike and shoved into this brand new 1000cc superbike, basically. V4 powered, just like MotoGP. And it's kind of in the perfect storm. Like, the Panigale V4 is a freak. It is a bazooka of a bike. Super fast in a straight line, but super smooth on tyres in the right hands. And very, very, very fast. It's almost kind of strange because there's prolific riders in the series who are also on Panigale V4s. The aforementioned Chaz Davies, Eugene Laverty, and Michael Ruben Rinaldi are all on V4 powered Panigales, but yet Bautista is head and shoulders above the rest on the same machinery, winning these races by as much as 15-16 seconds. It's not just beating people up, he's beating them down. It is ridiculous. Combine that with, let's be honest here, Bautista was probably criminally underrated in the first place. I think people forget he filled in for Lorenzo at Phillip Island last year in MotoGP, rode it to 4th place and was only a fraction off Andrea Dovizioso, who has spearheaded Ducati's effort in MotoGP for the last 2 or 3 years now, where he has been the centerpiece of that team and one of the few guys that is regularly able to challenge and beat Marquez over a course of a season. Bautista's right there on that level. There was no doubt about that. So when you've got a guy who was criminally underrated in GP for 4 or 5 years, developing Aprilias, developing with Honda, a solid guy on an old school Honda prototype package back in the day, and doing good work with Ducati still for the Aspar team, and of course filling in at Ducati when need be, going over onto a series that has a brand new V4 powered superbike in it, given that he's the only guy in the field with experience of riding a V4 motorcycle at that level, besides maybe Eugene Laverty, who also used to be in GP himself. You factor all of that in, a guy who's been able to master the Pirelli tyres very, very quickly, that the series runs, and this is the overall weapon that you've got. A guy that has been able to come in and dominate this series. And it's funny that we talk about this now because the series has dramatically changed in the last few years. I think Dorna have been treating Worlds as a bit like a plaything, trying to tweak the format, trying to make the field a bit more balanced, because until this year, it was either you won in green or you run in red. It was Kawasaki or Ducati. They were all there was a fight between those guys and everybody else, and the series, has tried to counteract that with some changes. I think 3 years ago they had reverse grids where whoever won race 1 would start race 2 from 9th on the grid, and they would push row 2 on the front row. So for example, if you started 4th, you'd have reverse grid pole for race 2. They'd push the second row onto the front row, and they put the front row onto row 3. So they would go 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, like that basically. So if you won race 1, you'd be starting race 2 from 9th on the grid. They split the weekend format to have a race on Saturdays, trying to get more weekend tickets being bought for races, because they didn't feel like it was worth going to a weekend of World Superbike action on a Saturday. And last year they went one stage further. They introduced rev limits to the series. Now what rev limits are is that Dorna can now tell a manufacturer you've got to take 250 revs or more in some cases off your motorcycle to try and balance the books and hinder performance. We saw this a lot last season, where Kawasaki was nerfed to start the year and they had to adapt their current Ninja to try and get over the fact that their race bike actually had less overall revs to play with than the road-going version of their Ninja. That's how crazy it was. And it had an impact. I don't know if people were watching last season, but they took 250 revs off the Kawasaki to start the year. Ducati was all over Jonathan at the start of last season. Marco Melandri had a double victory for Ducati in Phillip Island. Jonathan was pushed quite hard. He only took one win out of the 2 in Thailand. They were all over him in Aragon. Like Xavi Flores was right up there alongside Chaz. Again, Chaz and Jonathan split wins in Aragon. So Jonathan led the championship, but there was Ducatis right in his ballpark all over him. They gave all the other manufacturers 250 revs back because Dorna felt by their algorithms that Ducati had the best bike. Ducati didn't win a race again that season. And it got to the point where, okay, Yamaha won a few. Michael Vandermark and Alex Lowe's both won at least one race each for Yamaha over the course of the season. But Jonathan would win the entire back end of the championship. He won 11 straight races to close out the season, which was crazy. But the key thing was that because Jonathan's teammate Tom Sykes was struggling a little bit on the same bike, Dorna didn't cripple Kawasaki further on the rev limit adjustments. They felt like it was unfair. Now, Dorna have always come out and said that they don't want to stop people from being too great. But now this debate has come up again now that Bautista his dominance is on a totally different scale to what Jonathan Ray's was. Okay, Jonathan was winning races, but he had to work hard for a lot of his wins. He wasn't curb stomping the field by 20 seconds every race weekend. He just wasn't. Bautista in full race trim is on another level compared to everybody else. He's winning these races by 10 to 15 seconds almost every time out. It's obvious that combination is busted, and if anything, Aragon this past weekend showed the rest of the field might be catching up. To be fair, Aragon has always been a circuit that Ducati has gone well around, but we had Eugene Laverty challenge for a podium, and for the first time this weekend, Chaz Davies got on the podium twice in races 1 and 2. So now we're looking at a situation going, well, they've got to do something. Now, don't get it twisted. I genuinely believe a lot of these Dorna rule changes were specifically brought in to bring Jonathan Ray down a peg. Like, let's call a spade a spade. They didn't want him on top. when sporting director Gregorio Lavia, a former racer himself, says that, you know, they were being critical of Jonathan for not having Valentino Rossi's personality and him not really putting butts on the seats, Jonathan responded with a brilliant celebration where he was literally on a poker table celebrating his 4th world championship, and that was the most charismatic celebration I think anybody had all season. It was a fun little fuck you back to the series in that sense, but they were doing that to bring Jonathan down a peg. He was a bit too good, and now they're in a situation where they've replaced one dominant threat with an even bigger dominant threat in Bautista, and now I'm not sure what the series wants to do with itself. Well, we got the first, you know, action where that's concerned, like yesterday. The time I'm recording was April 11th, by the way. Yesterday they announced they're taking 250 revs off the Panigale V4, and they've given Honda back 500 because they're really struggling in the series right now. I personally am not convinced that it's enough, personally, but we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. It's Assen next. Assen is another one of those tracks that tends to equalise the field. We saw it in Phillip Island, which is probably what made Bautista's win so shocking, was that Phillip Island tends to be a track where everybody's on a kind of a level playing field. It kind of nullifies bikes' advantages and disadvantages. Everyone can seem to run close on that track. Assen's another one like that, which is bound to make it interesting. So what now? This is going to spark the debate of, well, where do we go from here? Is dominance a good thing? Now, it's hard to say because some of the battles we've had for second in these races have been fantastic. Anyone who watches Aragon this past weekend will know the fights between Ray, Davies, Laverty, the Yamahas of Alex Lowe's. They were great racing and great action. We didn't see Bautista in shot for most of the Grand Prix. He was already down the road, but the action for second was great. Is that going to be enough to keep people tuning in as the season goes by? That's the debate that I'm wondering through in my head right now. Do you want to curb someone for being successful? Because Bautista is busted. There is no doubt about it. He has broken the format of this series, because it doesn't matter what scenario Bautista is in. No one is able to challenge him over an entire race distance. The closest we got was Phillip Island Superpole race, and Jonathan was at 110%, and he couldn't beat Bautista over a 10-lap sprint race. But that's just the problem. If you cripple Bautista on the Ducati, Jonathan Ray's had 9 straight second places this season. Would you be replacing one dominant guy with another dominant guy because Jonathan will be right back on top again? Do you want that same headache again? It's a really, really puzzling situation, and I don't think there's an easy answer here, because Bautista is such a massive, he's such a massive forward fixture compared to even guys on the same bike. If you cripple him, you cripple everyone on a Panigale V4, and I'm not sure that's entirely fair on Davies, Laverty and Ruben Rinaldi, who are still struggling in the championship by comparison. And if you do bring Bautista down a peg, you open the door to Jonathan Ray coming in and stealing a 5th championship, which is what you were actively trying to fight against in the first place. So I ask you guys out there, is this okay? Is it okay that Bautista completely curb stomps the entire season? Because the way he's going right now, it would not surprise me if he wins every single race, unless major action is brought in. Would that be fair? Would you still want to keep watching the series in spite of that? Is that okay? I don't know personally. I feel like they may have to, almost sacrifice this season and then change the rules again and hit Ducati with a heavier penalty for next year. Maybe just say, you know what, Bautista's going to dominate this year and win the title, whatever happens. You might as well just let him have it, and then we focus on 2020. 250 revs is not going to suddenly bring Ducati in by 15 seconds. It just isn't. It's not a big enough difference. We saw Kawasaki last year be able to adapt in such a way where even in spite of the lost revs, they found a way around it with setup changes, and then Jonathan would go on to dominate the second half of 2018. So it could just be a matter of ingenuity. That's what Kawasaki's been better at than everybody else. And don't get me wrong, all the big manufacturers in superbikes are homologating their road bikes in mind of racing. It's just Ducati are better at it and a bit more blatant about it than everybody else. Kawasaki put their road going ninja and gave it more revs to compensate. The Yamaha, with its R1M, had guys like Valentino Rossi and Bradley Smith, former MotoGP guys, develop it. Like, they're not stupid. What wins on Sunday still sells on Monday, except in superbikes, because people are not spending upwards of $20,000 on race bikes anymore. And that's part of the problem. It's why I often think superbikes is more important. Yes, MotoGP is brilliant with its race prototypes and seeing what you can do when you open Pandora's box when it comes to bike development. I love that side of the game. But I also love World Superbikes because those are the bikes you can actually buy 95% of the technology in front of you in a showroom tomorrow morning if you wanted to. There's always an aspirational tendency that comes with that I genuinely love about the series. And I'm not, watching this year has been weird. Seeing Bautista curb stomp this championship so far has been weird. It was, watching on British Eurosport was like watching a wake. Don't get me wrong, that series has got a lot of friends of a lot of British guys in that paddock, like Leon Haslam and Alex Lowe's. They love their Brits on there, and Jonathan Rea was a very easy, biased meal ticket for him. That now the Spanish guy has come in and kind of upset the apple cart. But I would love to hear what you guys think. Is this a big problem? Is this something that needs to be addressed? Is it fair on Bautista that he's brought down a peg for the good of the series? My personal opinion is it almost doesn't matter if your series is or isn't fair. If people aren't watching, it's not going to matter. You're not going to survive. The smoking gun is going to be, are people going to still continue to watch this series as the year goes on if they clock on fast enough that no one's going to beat Alvaro? And that might be a problem going forward. But I would love to hear you guys' perspective on this as always. It's a very interesting one. I'm sure you can relate to some parallels between that and Formula 1 with the current Mercedes situation. And, thank God Ferrari's come up and made it a bit more interesting. But the early parts of the hybrid era, the early 2000s with Ferrari, crippling Ferrari in 05 to allow Renault back into play. There's some parallels there, which I think you guys might find interesting. But I've just rambled about World Superbikes for 23 minutes. I'm actually quite impressed with myself on this one. I'm going to go get a drink. But I do really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your perspectives in the comments if you enjoyed it or not. And I will catch you guys on the flip side. I've been Andre Harrison. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll see you guys next time. Sayonara.